We may as well get a start on. I was not expecting this many people to come to my talk, so thank you. It's really cool that you're here. It's really. Hopefully you can hear me. Is that all right? You don't need my cool. Thanks, man. So it's really humbling for you to choose to come here. I want to extend my thanks to Sam and the team at VCA for inviting me. To be honest, this is actually the first time I've ever spoken at something, so I'm a little bit nervous, admittedly, but hopefully you can extend me some grace and we'll see how we go. My title of thanks to ChatGPT if you were here in the last session, which I call the digital mirror, which what it reveals about your ministry framework, and that's what we're going to be talking about, but a lot more detail than that, but I'll start with a little bit of information about myself. My name is Joel. I am the digital pastor at Soul Revival Church. I've been working one day a week at Soul Revival since 2020. And the reason that I screenshotted this is to show that I'm part of a team, which is really important to me and really important to us as a church. So I couldn't do my job without the help from a number of these people, in particular our lead pastor, Stu Crawshaw, Braden and Ethan I work really closely with as well. And then we also have a team of volunteer pastors as well, which always support us. And today, my man Hudson, who is part of our communications team, is actually recording my talk as well. So he's a volunteer as part of our ministry as well. So I just want to shout out to him as well. So the main parts of my role, I record and produce 2 podcasts a week for our church. And we do the creation and production of our weekly newsletter, which is also kind of in conjunction with our website. The other thing is that we coordinate the design and creation of some apparel, which is particular to our church. And then also, I'm the pastor that oversees our communication team. We have 10 service teams at Soul Revival Church, and we have a pastor overseeing at least one of them, and so I oversee the communications team. I actually grew up through Soul Revival. I have, for want of a better word, been drinking the Soul Revival Kool-Aid for a number of years. And I became a Christian around 15, 16 at that time in the Soul Revival Youth Ministry. I then became a leader in the youth ministry, then a leader in the youth and young adults ministry, and then in 2011 we actually planted Soul Revival Church. And it's been going pretty strong ever since. God has been very, very kind to us and awesome supporting us as we try and build his church in the way that he wants us to. So that's kind of what I got to. And then by 2020, I was on staff, which is really, really cool. The other thing is that my family is, I have a wife and 3 kids. My wife, Karen, and my son, Leo, he's 11. Middle daughter, Everly, with that weird smile, she's 9. And then Remy is 4.5. And they're in their pajamas because that's on Christmas Day last year when we went and looked at Christmas lights. So just that's enough about me though. But today, my intention for today is that I'll give you something of value. And I'm not sure what that's going to be yet, but hopefully you think differently or think creatively about your ministry and how that can actually impact others, and you can love God and love others in a better way. That's the intention of it. Yes, I'm going to say that digital ministry I think is important, or communications, however you want to call it, but I don't want to stand up here being an expert about it. I don't think that's entirely true. We want to just share what we've learned over the last 5 years since I've been in the role, and also previously to that 13 years in terms of church planning, and then also 20 years of youth ministry prior to that. That's the intention. Because if you took a cursory glance at our YouTube analytics, for example, or our podcast downloads, you go, they don't have that big an audience, even though they've produced over 400 podcasts. But what I'd like to say is that doesn't mean that really what I'm trying to say is that this is what we've learned, not this is what you should do. And that's why I want to see that that's how you can think about it. Talking about not having an audience, too much of an audience, we did do one episode on the Shock Absorber podcast where we talked about the opening ceremony from the Olympics and where they recreated the Last Supper. And that's probably our biggest viewed video on YouTube with 2,500 views. And the funniest thing was that it was all atheists because they got fired up about it. And I don't mind getting stuck into a little bit of comments like, I don't think that's what we said. Did you listen to the whole episode, for example? But then it just ended up these guys just having their own atheist conversations together. And like, somewhere in there he says, I'm just trolling Christian YouTube channels there. I'm just trolling all Christian channels looking for answers, things like that. So it did seem to have some kind of an impact. I don't know if they actually ended up considering Jesus, or they are actually, but maybe from a negative space. But that was just as a joke. I thought that was kind of funny. So today, though, is the intention to show what we've learned. And I think key to that is having a ministry framework that is well thought out and really solid. I'll get into that later. But then I want to talk about how we take our digital ministry and what we've learned in the last 5 years. That's a narrow perspective. Then go to a broader perspective of how the whole church and what you do as a whole church influences that. And then I want to come back down to the practice of our digital ministry and what we're doing right now. So narrow, broad, narrow. That's where we're trying to go. Then I would like to try and, if we get time, to hit on some practical ideas or at least some questions you can think about for your own particular context. And then hopefully, I'd like to do some Q&A and see if I can answer any questions, or at least give you some value about what that's going to look like in going forward in your ministry or your particular context. But to start with, a story. I came on staff, like I said, at Soul Revolver Church in January 2020. Prior to that, I'd just been recording the first season of the Shock Absorber podcast with our senior pastor, Stu, and then it opened up an opportunity for me to come on staff 1 day a week. If you do remember 2020 though, so I started in January and March was COVID, which is just, it's fortuitous timing actually, because like any church, there's a mad scrabble. There was a mad scrabble to figure out what are you going to do online because you can't see each other. We actually, in the first lockdown of 2020, streamed all of our 6 gatherings that we had. We had a number of churches saying, "Oh, we're just doing one." We decided to stream all 6, which was a pretty crazy undertaking. And a lot of that credit has to go to Ethan, our youth pastor, who actually did all of that almost all by himself, which is crazy, but he was actually able to do it. By the second lockdown though, we switched gears to a more podcast style format. So during 2021, we were recording 4 podcasts a day. So we did Shock Absorber podcast in the morning. This was on Fridays. This is the day I work for church, it was on Fridays. So we did a Shock Absorber podcast in the morning, 2 church gatherings that we pre-recorded, and then a Chip Lunch podcast at the end of the day. And Braden and Ethan, who I pointed out before, they actually went on to the rest of the day and did a live youth event for the youth group, basically from 6 p.m. and they often didn't finish until 10 o'clock at night. So again, not to say look how good we are, it's just that this is what really excites us, and that's what the COVID gave us the opportunity to actually do. This is a different set that we eventually did because we had to move things around where we were recording. You can see that there was still a mandate that we had to wear masks if you weren't actually speaking during COVID lockdown. So that was the most annoying thing ever, when you're trying to record podcasts and then take a mask off and then try and think about what you need to say to the podcast. We didn't want to edit too much because Ethan was editing these basically 4 hours it took him to actually put the whole thing together. But the reason that I put that photo up before, this is our week away at Soul Revolver Church, which is our church camp. So for 30 years, Soul Revolver Church has been going away in the middle week of the school holidays as an entire church. And this is from last year where we had about 280 people. This year, we just finished, it was that 3 weeks ago, we had 250 people. But like I said, it was cancelled in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic. Now, and as I said, it was really annoying, but it provided us an opportunity to do something special, which was we decided to do Week Away online. And that meant that we had to do a whole lot of things. Week Away usually runs from Friday to a Wednesday. So we tried to do something online every single day to actually say, oh, we can't really do Week Away properly, but we can do something that's online all the time. So we switched, the kids series was going to be on Jonah, and we decided to switch that into the whole Bible Talk series. Stu is a magnificent preacher, and he turned that around in 2 days' time, which was pretty amazing. We did have a trivia night one night during Week Away. We did that completely online. So it was a Facebook streamed event, and we actually were able to have people call in. So the people that we knew, we could get them to call in and answer questions. And we also have a thing called a soiree, which is really just our talented musicians just play some music and we eat cheese and biscuits. That's all it really is. But we had an online version of that on Facebook, and I was actually listening to one of my mates play music while I did some gardening in the front yard during 2021. So all of those things are really, that kind of experimentation set the scene for what we're going to do as a church going forward. So that's why I said it was fortuitous that my time in coming on staff and also the pandemic was actually really good for us because of the way that we decided to keep moving forward with our digital ministry. We've added that again, but as an example of how this has developed, this is originally our Chip Lunch podcast. That's the first thumbnail. It doesn't look amazing, I would say. That's episode 13. We're obviously having a bit of fun on there. That story is quite funny if you listen to it, but I won't bore you with the details. This is the shock absorber. This is still one of my favourite shock absorber episodes we ever did, which was with Michael Duckett from MacArthur Indigenous Church, where he talked about basically Indigenous, being a Christian as an Indigenous minister. And it's really, really fantastic. So I highly recommend that to you as well. We also had Timothy Paul Jones on, who is an apologetics, go back one. He's an apologetics podcast and writer. So we had him on this is all during COVID. So we were able to have him online. And then as we move location where we're recording, you can see like the thing that I'm trying to show you is the iterative approach that we've adopted, which was, I wouldn't if you're going to do digital stuff, try not to allow it to get in the way of actually producing, because that's the only way you actually get better. So the thumbnails show you an indication of how we've moved forward over time. So Chip Lunch then changed to this. This is me just mucking around on Canva, literally. I just found chips to go in the background, and I look like an idiot in this lemon shirt. And so we put lemons on it because they talked about my shirt on it and that kind of stuff. And then we eventually rebranded Chip Lunch to look like this, which is kind of got that fast food vibe. And that's how Shock Absorber's looking. So we continue to do this iterative approach, and I would say that it's not possible without having what we call a strong ministry framework and theology strategy practice. So a couple of other things that we were able to do from 2021 onwards, we relaunched our Apparel brand. This was a shirt, for example, to celebrate 10 years of Soul Revival Church and 20 years of Soul Revival ministry. One thing that we've really adapted towards is doing an apparel that is a keepsake for our Week Away. So now that Week Away is back on from 2022, the one on the left is they're all based on the talk series. The one on the left is from 2023. The Live Free series was 2024, where Anthony Douglas did a talk series on free will, which is very fascinating. And then this is actually this year, which I am wearing today. And this is our biggest line that we did, which is based on sanctification. And so we had 3 different hats, 4 jumpers, and 2 long sleeve shirts. And also during 2025, we've actually relaunched our website as well, which is, we see it as a forward-facing part of our ministry, the most forward-facing part of our ministry. So we actually tailor it towards newcomers. So whether you're looking for a new church or looking to actually find a church. As I said, the only reason I think this is the case, and you'll find me to be very adamant about that, especially the people I've already talked to at this conference, is that is having a really solid ministry framework. And to begin with, we see this as partnering with Jesus. We can only do this under God and what He's done. And He's, as I said, been incredibly generous to us, and He continues to be, and we want to partner with Him as He grows His church. So when you hear the word ministry framework, you kind of might be like this guy, no, is this just a scam? Is this just another thing? Is this just another system that people tell you what to do with church? Just bolt it on and it'll fix all the problems you have. We had a great discussion just before. We were saying a lot of the systems that come from thinking about how you look at church as a ministry framework from gigantic churches that have just had this works for us, and you just bolt it on and it'll make your church as big as us. I would say that because we've started from a very low base from youth ministry, when they started Soul Revival in 1991, it was 4 people. When we planted the church in 2011, it was 30 people. We believe our ministry framework can really be scaled up or scaled down regardless of what your context is. And God has taught us a lot through it, but our ministry framework has basically stayed the same, because now we started with 30. We're now 7 gatherings across 5 different locations, including, we're mainly based in the Southern Shire, but we also have a gathering at Ryde as well. So my hope is to move you from, is this a scam, narrowing your eyes and thinking this is ridiculous, to more like our children's pastor here on the oof meter. Because that's where I would like you to start thinking openly and hopefully broadening your mind. This is Tim Bilhartz, by the way. He is our children's minister. And I would say he's one of the leading children's thinkers in Australia. And if you want, check out his book called Child in God's Church, but we'll move on. Ministry framework. Soul Revival's ministry framework is summarised by this: Theology Strategy Practice. And to simplify that, the theology is why. And so we're part of the Sydney Anglican Diocese, as I know a number of people are here. We're a Reformed evangelical church. That means we're gospel-centred and word-based. And without Jesus, nothing we actually do is possible. And we want him to be the focus of our ministry. I really like what Dave was talking about there. It's that we want the Bible and what Jesus has done to inform what we do across our church. The next one, though, is strategy. And that is the how of how we do ministry. So this comes from a why. It's informed by our biblical convictions. And that's something I want to emphasize, is that we always want and encourage people to start with their theology and what their biblical convictions are. The strategy is, though, what makes your church or our church distinctive. And I can go into that in more detail in a minute, because I think that is the key piece for what we're talking about today. But that is what I think makes your church distinctive. And you might have some ideas about that already. When you get to practice, though, it's what? What are you actually doing on the ground? And what are you doing in your day-to-day ministry as you actually try and serve Jesus? As you continue, though, you'll see that Soul Revival, we find that our practice can be extremely flexible depending on what context we have, because of the strategy is so strong and well thought out. That's what I would say. Yes, this is how we summarize it, sorry. So theology is Jesus changes everything. Our strategy is sharing the truth and love of Jesus. And then in practice, we are discipling one another to be on mission. That's a very, very top level look at how now it's much more detailed, but that's a very top line look of how we look at it. The thing is that I think there is a missing piece, or a lot of ministries miss, which is the strategy. And they skip the strategy and go straight from theology down to practice. Now, I think that's usually for good reasons. I think that's because we have really strong convictions about what the Bible's saying and what we should do in ministry. And I think it's like something that we need to ensure that we're encouraging, is that people are on fire for the gospel. But sometimes I find that if you miss strategy, the practice can become siloed. Ministries can become siloed. There's a compete for resources. It can limit, and I think that can limit the effectiveness of the ministry that you're a part of, whatever it is. And remember, this is church-wide. So as I said, I think the key piece is strategy. The thing is, the reason that I think that we skip it is because it's hard. It's probably the hardest thing that you have to figure out as a church and a church ministry. You can end up looking a bit like this. And because the thing is, that, like, what even is strategy? That would be the kind of thing that you would sometimes hear. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes a lot of thinking. It takes discussion. It can take disagreement. So it's a really hard thing to figure out sometimes. You can't see it and you can't really touch it. But you can, when you see it in actually happening, then you go, oh, there it is. So sometimes I would argue that if you don't have a strategy, that is your strategy. Does that make sense? So the thing is that it requires a lot of brain power. But every church is actually making strategic decisions. It's whether those decisions are intentional and aligned with their theology and their strategy and how they want their ministry to look. That's what I would say. But that is why I think it is the missing piece. And you can, at risk at looking like this guy, because I am throwing a lot of things that you may not have heard, or I'm trying to get through it quickly because I am keen to do Q&A. Here's a concrete example from my own church. So as I said, the way we summarize strategy is sharing the truth and love of Jesus. And then under that we say we're going to do that person to person, generation to generation, culture to culture, place to place. And we've just added space to space because of what we're talking about with the digital ministry, is that now we're trying to do it in a digital spaces as well. So I'll go through a couple of the distinctives for you. These are not all of them, but a number of the things that we say this is how we're going to do our ministry. So the first one is friendship. We like to use John 15:15 as an inspiration for this, where it says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. So not only is Jesus Jesus dying on the cross and resurrecting, not only has he reconciled us to God, but he's also reconciled us to each other. So that creates a different reality for us as friends. So whether it's leading youth or we're leading church, or we decided that we're going to gather together as friends first, and then invite anyone else who wants to come in it. So that's a lot of things that we've learnt from youth ministry, is that even if no crew are coming to youth ministry, we will still meet together as leaders, because we think that it's really important to come together as leaders under Jesus as we serve together in ministry. The next one, low-key, long-term and relational. We spend lots of time together. So as an example, on a Saturday night, that's actually a main gathering on a Saturday night at Soul Revival Church. I will be there at minimum from 4 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. There are a lot of people that still hang out until 2 o'clock in the morning, probably a bit younger than me. But we find that the more time we spend with each other, the more the relational reality that Jesus has won for us in terms of the friendship is awesome. And then consequently, the more action that we get in the church, the more we are able to be on mission outside of the church. And I know that sounds a little bit conflicting to how other things have done recently amongst churches, but I would, again, Soul Revival Kool-Aid, but I would say that I am much more likely to be on mission when I am spending more time with my Christian fellows. We also don't do many events. That's the other thing. I would say we only really have Christmas and Easter, it could be possibly considered an event. We do a carols event across the road from our Kirrawee location. And then we just have 2 internal events. So Week Away is the one I mentioned before, and our planning day. They're the only planned events that we have in the entire year. The most of the time is that we want to do majority of it out of what we're doing at church. Another thing that we're extremely passionate about is intergenerationality. And that means that we're an all-age, all-stage community across every single gathering that we have. We don't change our gatherings based on demographics or anything like that. Everyone is welcome to any of them. So whether it's a Friday, Saturday or Sunday night where we hold gatherings, wherever we are, it's all age, all stage. So we do have a large age range across a number of our gatherings. I'm friends, Stu's parents, for example, they're 80 and I'm friends with them as a result. Then we also have a much younger crew that I'm friends with as well. Hudson is 19 years younger than me. Is that right? Yeah, it's the only time it's the only way we'd actually be friends is me and Hudson. And we don't care about age. We just find that because of the reality that Jesus won for us in friendship, we're just friends. That's how it is. The key to that is the shock absorber approach that we have, which is a bottom-up and top-down approach. Young people are at the coalface of culture. They know what's going on. And I actually find that and this is a discussion we had in our breakout group just before in the Connect group, the church can end up being 10 years behind culture, basically because we don't give young people a voice. And I would say that, and I hope that doesn't sound too critical, but the reason that we use the shock absorber approach is the young people are at the coalface of change. They know what's going on. And then we use the biblical wisdom and experience of our older saints to come and have a conversation about that. So if you can imagine the church as a car traveling along the road and it hits a bump in the road, a cultural bump, we can absorb that shock and still be able to continue with the timeless principles of the gospel, but then we can also understand what's going on in culture, and so we can have that conversation and hopefully grow as a result. The next one, ministry in teams, and I do apologise if it's going on. I am extremely passionate about how we do ministry, but ministry in teams. We don't do a ministry unless you have a team. And we don't do it unless it meets these other parts of the strategy. So that's why I was talking about our practice is really flexible, but it also our strategy is massively influencing our practice. So we only do ministry in teams. So if we do have an idea for a new ministry, we won't do it unless we can build a team around it. And it's also a really good way to mitigate it against burnout. I'd certainly say we're not perfect in that, but I would say that it is a really good way to prevent burnout. And we also have a thing called ministry slide. When someone says, this isn't beyond my capacity in the moment, we go, that's cool. If you would like to do another ministry, we're going to find another ministry for you to slide into, rather than saying, okay, well, you're not. We like to say, you are more important than what you can give us. So if they are unable to do that ministry, it's okay. If that means that particular ministry fails, and it's not going to fail because we're in a team. So we just go, okay, that's fine. We're going to find another way to do it, rather than go, well, you've burnt out. I've met a lot of people at other churches who have been burnt out by ministry, and they've become really resentful because they weren't supported. And then sadly, they've left the church, which it makes me pretty sad, actually. Moving on to meals, we do meals at every gathering. And we have a hospitality team that is really, really large and has been built up over time. As we said, we only started with 30, but we've doing meals from the very beginning. This was a lesson learnt from a number of our Indigenous friends in northwestern New South Wales. They always had meals at their gatherings. So when our crew went up there, that was just before my time, they started going up there and coming under the leadership of Isaac Gordon in northwestern New South Wales. They always had meals, and we thought, well, why don't we do that? That's actually a really cool thing to do. We find that's a really amazing relational reality to actually come together after church or before church, depending on what time that particular service is, to actually just do life together. Bear one another's burdens, like Galatians says. I just have dinner I pay $7 for dinner every Saturday night at church, and I get to be with all of my brothers and sisters in Christ at church, which is really cool. The last one, third space community. This is based on a sociological principle came up by Ray Oldenburg came up with. So your first home is your first place. So your first place is your home. Your second place is your work or school, and third place is community, where you do community. So community is a massive part of what we do because you can see friendship, low key, long-term relational, and this also influences the community. As Oldenburg says, is made up with irregulars, and the regulars set the culture to be able to welcome irregulars in. So at our in particular, we try and set up this kind of reality where we can allow people to be welcomed in, but it's not like, oh, here, come into the church building. There's actually an ability for them to understand what's going on and see, oh, actually, we're going into this part of the building because we're actually going to do a church service now. So we found that people that have coming to church, or for the first time, I haven't been to church very often, find it a lot easier, smoother process to actually be part of church, because we've tried, or we've attempted to create this third space community vibe first, so that they can enjoy or actually understand what's going on. Yes, we do spend a lot of time together, which I was seeing in my notes. So that is the ministry framework, for example. Jesus changed everything, sharing the truth of love of Jesus, and discipling one another to be on mission. Like I said, that is the ministry framework that I think allows us to do all the things that I talked about with our digital ministry. So I've gone narrow, we've now gone broad, and this is the practice of digital ministry. So as always, our ministry starts with what I just said, the ministry framework. If you can just have a look here though, what we put out in the digital world is part of our practice. And I want to use the rebrand of our Chip Lunch podcast as an example. This was done by Jared. Jared is actually on the screenshot of the staff. He was actually one of the volunteer pastors. He runs his own design agency, and we engaged him to do work for church as well. He's been involved with Soul Revolve for a long time. I youth led with him actually. And he refused to come on the Chip Lunch podcast as a guest until he rebranded it. So eventually we got him to rebrand it, and this is what he came up with, this Chip Lunch vibe. And as I said, that iterative design has gone on. So this is what it was originally, and it went from this. And then he came up with this fast food vibe, which I thought it was really cool. But my favorite part of it is, we call it Chip Lunch podcast because it's people telling stories of Jesus changing everything, which was, if you remember, that was our theology, how we summarize our theology. Chip Lunch podcast is just people at our church coming on and telling us how they became Christians and how God's worked through their lives. So what excited me about when he designed this is like, that's exactly what we're trying to capture. And he also put the nice kind of fast food vibe onto it. We've actually turned that into badges recently. So every time someone finishes a podcast, we give them as a guest, we give them a badge to put on their hat or wherever they like. So, but how do we summarize the practice of communications and digital ministry? There's two things at the moment. We only really came up with this last year. We want to provide value, and we want to move people from the external to internal continuum. Now, that sounds, again, big words. Your hair might be going like that guy that we had up before, but it fits under what I said, our ministry framework again. To focus on our practice is when we're saying we're on discipleship and mission together. So actually the value part of it fits under discipleship, and the external to internal part fits under our mission. And the way that we kind of came up with this, we use an example of our ride pastor Joey, which is, he'd be upset if I was using that photo of him, because that's from quite a while ago. But we asked him, what content does he like to consume online? And he said he likes chefs, things about chefs, and also chess channels on YouTube. Now the funny thing is that this highlights that he's selfish. But that's actually all of us, right? Because that's why algorithms exist online, is to hijack our tendencies and give us more content of what we want. The reason they do that is so they can just make more advertising dollars against you. That's, in reality, that's why they do it. But if we use those examples of what Joey gave us and the fact that we know that he's selfish and so am I, how do we make our content in a way that is going to stick with our ministry framework, but also be engaging or interesting? And so we came up with 3 things, basically based off the chess and chef channels, is that they're authentic, they're insightful and entertaining. So we can do that too as well, as Christian content, and it still fits within our strategy. So if we continue with the chip lunch example, we think if we hit 2 of those 3 things, we're actually doing all right. So it's authentic because it's Christians telling true stories, and it actually creates relational connections amongst our church. So because we've got 7 different gatherings, sometimes people meet each other and they go, oh, I've heard your chip lunch. Oh, this was great. You talked about this kind of thing that happened in your life. And then they can actually have a really good conversation about it because they've kind of half met them already because they've listened to the podcast. It's also entertaining, like I said, so it's truthful. We have fun. There's quite a lot of laughter. And there's also some amazing heart-moving stories that people tell on that. And that's why I really love it, because they're authentically telling it. And also it's entertaining because you can listen to it whenever you want. I might, probably not the only one who loves listening to a podcast when you're doing the housework. I think it's transformed housework for me anyway, or at least my family may say that. So that's the discipleship element of our practice. Authentic, insightful, entertaining, provides value. The other part was moving people from an external to an internal continuum. Now, since I came on staff in 2020, I'd always grappled with how do we, like our practice is flexible, but how do we systemize it and figure it out in a way that's actually going to be cohesive in how we produce it? Because I felt like if we divided communications into internal and external, it wasn't really representative of what we want, and a bit clunky, because it would almost divide the ministry when we didn't need to. So it's not able to last year, able to crack it, and I've got to give Ethan credit for this. He helped me figure this out. We created a continuum. So it's kind of, I'm a bit hesitant to use business language when it comes to church, but it's like a customer journey. If you've ever seen something like that, you move from a customer journey. Like I said, I tried to steer away from that, but there's an example of a couple who came to our church about a couple of years ago that kind of fit this, which was really fortuitous for me. But as I said, if we say the first point of contact that someone has, probably they hear about a church or our church. The couple that I'm talking about, they were in an apartment at South Village in Kirrawee, across the road from where we are as a church, and they're like, I think that's a church. Then they looked us up on the website. So that's why we have it, in a sense, our website is forward-facing. We don't put our events or anything on that, really. We put, if you're coming to our church for the first time, the first couple of times, this is what you're going to get. The next thing that they did was they looked at our social content, which we do have a bit of. I think we still need to work a bit more on that. So we're not really aspirationally where we want to be yet. And then they looked at our sermons because the teaching was really important to them, which makes sense. The next thing was they looked at our content, so I'd say it's like our podcast. And then they looked at our live stream, and then they eventually came to church. And the reason that I'm saying this is our practice of our communications ministry is that we really want to get people to getting our newsletter, which means they're a member of our church. That's ideally where we'd like them to go to come to. The other thing is anyone can drop in at this point at time. That's why I like it to be in a continuum. But the idea is to try and move people towards the newsletter, if that makes sense. And it also kind of fits with our third place theory as well. So we want people to move from irregular, so visit the website a couple of times, to becoming a regular by receiving the newsletter. And all the other parts influence that on the way. So that is our practice. So we try and provide value in terms of discipleship and an external to internal continuum on mission. I can't say that word, sorry, continuum. That's it for me. I do apologise that it's like a ton of information and words, and it may seem a bit too much. But again, like I said, I get excited about things. But as I said, I wanted to leave you with some ideas about how you can start thinking about your own ministry or where you actually work. So it really comes back to the ministry framework. And you may not have a ministry framework, that's okay. But I thought, let's do a couple of questions where you might be able to start thinking about it. So in terms of theology, how does Jesus changing you or your church, how does Jesus changing you, your church, and the world impact how you do ministry? And what are the core biblical convictions of your church? So I'm assuming that some of you have come to hear about digital ministry, and it might disappoint you to say that I think that you should really focus on your ministry framework first before you start spinning your wheels in the practice of like just trying to get lots of things done. And I think that would be a danger leading to burnout and not knowing what you're doing. Everything, I think, starts with what the Bible says. And that's where we should start in terms of your ministry framework across your church and also your communications ministry. The next one is, as I said, the missing piece is strategy. So all of this comes from your core biblical convictions, I believe. What is your ministry approach? Does it align with your theology and your biblical convictions? And what do you think works and what could you change easily? And then how could your leadership discuss or get together working on the ministry rather than in the ministry? Because I think that's probably where a lot of people in this conference is that you probably feel like you're just constantly working in the ministry rather than working on the ministry and getting the traction that you would really like to get. My suggestions for those kind of things is to have a meal together with your church leaders or the people that are influencers in the church or can make decisions. Get them together and have a discussion about this. Like, what are we dreaming about? The fact that Jesus has won the freedom for us on the cross, what does that free us up to do? That's right. And take a positive frame of mind going into it. I think it would be like really, really cool to go, I could not wait to do this under Jesus. That's where I would like to see discussions go with strategy. Yeah. The other thing I would say is do your absolute best to involve lots of people in the decisions that you make. Rather than, obviously there's people that have responsibility and have to make the decisions, but try and get people involved in the discussion around it too. That's the other thing. And then questions for practice. Is what your church doing aligned with your theology and strategy? And if not, why not? Is the practice flexible to take in your ministry context? An example of that is we do meals all the time, but the time and type of meal changes. So on Friday nights, we do a dinner. On Saturday nights, we have 2 gatherings, one in Ryde, one in Kirrawee. We do dinner as well, but they're at different times. And then we have 3 gatherings on Sunday morning at different locations. They all do a breakfast, but they're at different times. And then Cronulla on Sunday evening has a dinner, and again, it's a different time to what the Saturday nights are. So that's why I think the strategy allows your practice to be extremely flexible, because you're still doing the same thing, but it might be in a different way. And then the last thing, where could you experiment? A few years ago, we had a thing as like, what rockets can we blow up? So basically, Elon with his SpaceX, you know how he just kept blowing up rockets and they figured out what they were going to do and they managed to actually launch a rocket into the sky and land it. What rockets could you blow up without causing too many issues? And how can you experiment to be able to see what you could actually learn from those experiences and maybe take your ministry in a different direction? To wrap it up? No, we got the call? Okay. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Thank you.